This video is sponsored by PCBWay. More about them later. Hey, welcome back to the channel and this epic tour of my studio. This is the 2022 studio tour. Once in a while you see a dot in the right corner of the screen. Just click on the link if you want to see a more in-depth video about the gear I'm showing you. Okay, let's go. So let's start with this Jasper rack. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it's 6 stories high. But I've taken out the bottom one. I'll show you that in a bit. And it also has a extended tier out to the right here. I'll get back to that rack later as well. And on the top here we have the Roland Juno 106. Everyone knows what that sounds like. It's a classic, of course. I had the Juno 6 earlier, but I find the Juno 106 a little bit better suited for my music, the music I like. It's a little bit more clinical than the Juno 6 due to its crystal, keeping the oscillators in check, a digital master clock, where the Juno 6 has an analog master clock. And that makes it more precise in its sound than the Juno 6 or 60. But I like it. I love it. The Juno 106, as you'll hear me say quite a lot during this video, this is a cornerstone in my setup. I use it a lot, and yeah, the Juno 106. And of course we have the JX8P. You've seen me doing a lot of videos about the JX8P, also lately with the new Roland Boutique JX08. Another cornerstone in my setup. I use it almost on every track I make. I think the pads coming from this, they cannot be beaten in my opinion, not by any synth. The soundtrack patch and variations of the soundtrack patch is absolutely necessary to get into a lot of my 80s inspired music. So I love the JX8P for that. I have the PJ800 controller here, not something you must have. I see on forums all the time that people say you can't program the JX8P without the PJ800 or another controller, which is totally not true. It's a very easy synth to program without any controller, really. So that's simply not true. And below here we have the Sequential Circuits Prophet VS. You've seen me do videos about this lately. And this is a hybrid synth, digitally stored waveforms with analog filters and amplifiers. And it sounds fantastic, very unique, similar to the PPG, a much cheaper alternative to the PPG, which was also a hybrid synth. This is probably one of my favorite synths ever. Nothing can really mimic the Prophet VS, so I love this synth. And this is, of course, the Korg Poly 61 from 1982. This was supposed to be the successor to the Poly 6, but it sounds very different. And I love the sound of this. This is very early 80s, perfect for Italo disco and sort of tracks which needs a more sort of simple sound. But the sounds really cut through, and it's a sort of a mixture of a lo-fi sound with a sort of cosmic space type of sound. So it's perfect for that. And it has a very nice arpeggiator. I just love the Poly 61. I don't use it on everything, but when I need the Poly 61 sound, I use the Poly 61 because nothing other in terms of synthesizers can touch it when it comes to these exact sounds. So this will never go out of this studio. And below that we have another Roland. This is the JX3P, of course. And the vigilant eye might see that this is a modded JX3P. This is a Kiwi modded JX3P. And I have this for a reason. I'm going to do some videos with a Kiwi mod later. Not because I love the Kiwi mod. I much prefer a stock factory JX3P. But I have it in here for some future videos I'm going to release soon, I hope. And at the bottom here I have a stack of old keyboard magazines and brochures and ads, etc. from the 80s. I love to read those. And up here, close to the wall, I have some stuff I don't use every day, but I like to have it close at hand because I might need it. So it's in this room for that reason, and that is a EMU performance piano module. I have a Kawai Q80EX sequencer, and I have a Commodore 64G, very important. It has another SID processor than the regular one, so this sounds different than a regular Commodore 64. And I have the Kawai K1M, a sort of lo-fi hybrid synth. I made a video about that some while back, as well as I also did with the Commodore 64G, so look that up. I have these close at hand. Before we continue, please have a look at my sponsor of this video, PCBWay. And PCBWay, they make custom-made circuit boards for all kinds of applications. And they have a very cool website you can browse through. And they offer a full range of printed circuit boards capabilities to fit basically all your PCB needs. Whether it's circuit boards for a synth upgrade or an old computer module you're building or whatever need you have, PCBWay might be able to help you out, so check them out. I'll leave a link for you in the description. So here we have what I call my sampler rack. So let's go through what we have here and see where we end up. At the top here, this is not a sampler. This is the Roland TR-808, of course, on this extended tier from the Jasper stand. Not much left to say about this, a classic in its own right. Up here I have a Roland MC500 sequencer, which I use occasionally. And I have a Technique stereo cassette deck, the RSB465. I can still remember buying this, and I've used this a lot. So let's go over to the rack. And this is the Prophet 2002 digital sampler, the rack version of the Prophet 2000, which I also have. I'll show you that later. This doesn't work at the moment, and it works and everything, but everything I sample into it, everything I try to get out of it, it just sounds scrambled. And I've searched a little bit. I have somewhat limited resources now in terms of both gear and tools, so I don't think I'll be able to fix this myself, so I'll probably have to send it away to be fixed by someone else. Sort of a defeat for me, but it is what it is. So that doesn't work at the moment, but since I have the 2000, it's not that critical. At least I have parts if I need to. Below we have the EPS 16 Plus from Ensoniq, which a lot of you guys know. This works just fine. I haven't done a video on it yet, but I will. And I use it for specialties, let me put it like that. Some special things I like to do, which doesn't involve sampling per se. So I'll get back to that later. Here is a very cool sampler. I did a video about that quite recently. The Roland SP700. This is a sampler, sample player, so you can't sample into this, but it has all the goodies from the 700 series of samplers from Roland from the early 90s and some years above that. So this works on SCSI, on this SCSI drive here. So I've showed you this in videos before. I love the Roland 16-bit samplers from the early 90s. It has a sort of different vibe than the 12-bit samplers from the 80s. So I need and want both the 12-bits and the 16-bit samplers, but I've settled for the sample player from Roland, really. I don't have much need to sample into any Roland 16-bit sampler myself, so this will do just fine, and it works perfectly. And moving on, not turned on at the moment, the Roland S330 digital sampler. This is a 12-bit sampler, and this is of course the one rack unit version of the S550, pretty much the same sampler, with just less memory and some small minor differences as well. You can use this with external mouse, and you can hook up a monitor at the back here, which I do if I'm using it. I have a video where I show you how that's done, both for the S330 and the S550. A regular floppy disks on this, not a emulator. And below that we have the Yamaha TX816W, the sampler from hell, as Junkie XL told you in his sampler video. I have the Typhoon OS on this, makes it a lot more easy to work. And this is one of the hidden favorites of mine. This is a 12-bit stereo sampler, not many of those around. So I really like this sampler, and it has some very, very, very nice features. Below that, we have the Studio 128X from Upcode, a MIDI Patchbay. So all of these rack units in here and some of the synths to the left here are hooked up to this MIDI Patchbay, so I can access them by turning my master keyboard into one of these inputs here. I can reach all of these synths. And these are also hooked up to a audio Patchbay below here. I'll get to that in a minute. The rack here is really the rack I use the most. The sounds in here are sounds I use the most in my productions and whatever I'm making, really. So below that, we have the Akai S612 sampler, of course, with the MD280 quick disk drive and the storage space for 10 quick disks. You can also get a floppy emulator for these days. I don't have that here. I really like the look of this, and this actually works. So I use this a lot. A really nice sampler with the hands-on controls of everything, even the start and end points, loop points, etc. And the input preamp on this is really good for things like bass, etc. It can really crunch up the sound in a really nice, warm way. The S900, I recently did a video about that. It's a classic 80s sampler that made Akai the kings of sampling. And below that, the S700, which sounds exactly the same as the 900, pretty much the same sampler, but you don't have as much sampling time and a lot of the features like the attack times, etc. you have in the S900, you don't have on the S700, which only has a release and not much else in terms of attack, decay, and sustain. So you can't shape the sounds as much with the S700 as you can on the S900. And we have a Alesis MIDI Verb 2. I really like this MIDI Verb for a couple of reasons. I really like the gated reverbs and stuff like that. This is a preset machine. You can't adjust any of the parameters. You can only mix the input, mix, and output on this. But I really like this effects processor. I use it a lot. Below that, I have a Digimax DP88. This is 8 digitally controlled preamps. So every time I have to or want to make a video where I use more than a stereo sound source, if I want to, let's say I want to record 3 or 4 synths in real time with a drum machine, etc. You see me do that in videos all the time. Then I pipe these synths and drum machines, etc. through this preamp. I have 8 preamps on this, which I pipe optically through a DAT into my sound card interface, the Audient ID22. I have videos about this setup. It works very well for me. I use this almost every single day. And below here I have the audio Patchbay, and it looks like a mess, and I'm the only one that can decipher what's going on here. Many of the points are simply through points, like this Alesis MIDI Verb. It comes up on these 4 jacks here, where these are the inputs and these are the outputs of the Alesis MIDI Verb, so I have easy access. So this is not normaled in any way on the Patchbay, if you know what that means. And a lot of the synth samplers in the rack and to the left in the Jasper stand also comes up at the lower Patchbay here, just as a through point, so I can access the outputs of the synths and pipe them into the preamp if I want to, or going elsewhere if I have to do that. While some of the points are half normal, like this point for instance, where I have hooked up my my preamps in the SSL 6 mixer and the insert points. This might sound like some black art as I'm describing it right now, but it works very well. So I have not named any of the patch points really, except for the lower Patchbay here, because I know how everything is set up. But anyone else coming in here would not understand a bit of this going on. But that's not necessary either, because no one is ever in here except me. Maybe Anders Jensen, but no one else. So that's basically this whole rack. And let's move on. Okay, back on camera. So you saw the SCSI drive for the Roland SP700, and this sits on top of my main PC. This is my DAW, really. And I see I have to clean some dust out of this pretty soon. I have it backwards because I need to access the USB ports all the time. I'm moving things in and out, so I find it more convenient to have it in this orientation. So that's that. On top of that, we have a little sync box from Dopefer, the MSY2. I use this a lot to convert MIDI signals into regular clock signals to drive arpeggiators and drum machines, etc. This is also a box that can output DIN sync, which is also very important to me. So I have this hooked up to the DAW, which drives my other gear if I have to in sync with the tempo of the DAW. And we have my Audient ID22, which is very important. It receives the ADAT from the Presonus DP88 you saw previously. And this is also piped into the SSL 6 mixer and the 500 series of outboards I have here. So this is all connected together in a way that makes my workstation really efficient, very flexible, incredible routing options with the SSL 6. And I've streamlined this setup, so this works perfectly for my need. It might not have been a perfect setup for everyone else, but this works perfectly for me. Everything I do goes through this system in some way. I also have a radial JDI stereo line box here, which is very important because I record a lot of the synths through this box for different reasons. I'll have to make a video about that later as well. I pipe the synths into this in stereo and out the XLRs and into the XLR, the mic inputs of the SSL 6 to give me a sort of extended headroom. I have to make a video about this because it really makes a difference. So I'll get back to that at a later time. I have a set of headphones here, the Beyerdynamics DT770 Pro, the 80 ohm version, hooked up to the SSL 6. I only use headphones when I record vocals to tracks I'm singing on. I don't like to use headphones. I use headphones as little as I can. I've never used headphones a lot. I have basically no tinnitus today because I never monitor loud, especially in headphones. So headphones is necessary evil. I never check my mixes in headphones. I never reference things on headphones. I basically don't like headphones a lot. But when I do need headphones, I use these because I think they sound great for extended periods of time when I record vocals. So that's what I use the DT770 Pro for in my studio. I also have a pair of AKG K240s from the 80s, which I have for guest vocalists, which doesn't happen a lot these days, basically never, but there might be occasions where I'd have to have a vocalist in here when the COVID situation is over, and therefore I have two sets of headphones. So that's that. I also have a external effects processor going on here, the Specular Tempus from GFI Systems. Love this processor. Really nice reverbs. Very good on synths to get those ambient sounds, ethereal sounds going. So I really like this. I have not made a video about it, but maybe I will. So that's really another monitor for hooked up to the DAW. So these two monitors are hooked up to the DAW. And I have my studio monitors, the M Audio BX5. I've had these for years. I've told you this before in my last studio tour, 2021 as well. I don't have any subwoofers. I don't have bigger woofers. I have these. 5 inches, works perfectly. I know my room. I never mix loud. I know how things are supposed to sound on these. If you know your room, you know your monitors, you have experience, you have a good ear for sound, and I have all these things, just to express my humble subjective opinion about myself. I don't need anything else. This room is not treated acoustically in any way. I don't need it. Judge my mixes before you judge the look of this room. So know your stuff. You can get along just fine with simple things. But I do have another monitor as well. I'm getting to that now as I pan the camera. Okay, so what else? Well, we have my master keyboard. This is a Nectar Panorama T6. I like it. I like the feel of the keys. It took some time to warm up to, but I decided that I should let go of my Roland Alpha Juno 2 as a master keyboard and use this instead. It's not hooked up through USB or anything. I just use the regular DIN MIDI out to access the MIDI patch base in my sound system and the M-Audio MIDI Sport 4x4, which I have here to get access to plug-in synths in the DAW. And I have the Isla S2400 drum machine, drum sampler here, which you've seen in other videos of mine. I got rid of a lot of old drum machines for this. And this has been a perfect replacement for me as a drum machine, really. I'm not using the sampling function at all on this, but I have to use the gear the way I feel complements my other stuff. So I use this in a basic way. Above it, I have the Steinberg CC121 MIDI controller for the DAW for Cubase. And this I use in tandem with the Houston controller, also for Cubase. So when I'm just working on a track, working on something, I use this as a controller, the MIDI fader, etc., and some of the buttons. But when I'm mixing down in the DAW, I use the Houston controller. M-Audio MIDI Sport 4x4, I told you about already. But on top of this, I have this very cheap Logitech desktop speaker. This is supposed to come in a pair, like in stereo, but I have this hooked up only as a mono monitor hooked up to the SSL 6. So when I mix my sounds, I use this as I would have used the Auratone back in the day. The mix in mono, if I can hear the bass coming through on this speaker, if I can hear the mix clearly, everything just smack in your face, then I know it's a good mix. And again, I mix on a very moderate level. We could easily whisper over my music when I mix. You don't have to mix any louder than that. And everything I mix is mixed as I would have done it if I was mixing down to vinyl in the 1980s. You roll off everything below, say, 80 hertz. You high pass a lot. You high pass pretty much every sound in the mix. And you should not hear a lot of bass bottom end going on if you want to sound 80s authentic, which I'm going for. If you're working on modern EDM, synthwave, all that, then you mix with much more bass, but then it's not 80s anymore. Then it's just modern EDM with 80s flavor. So if you're going for authentic 80s synth sound, you have to roll off a lot of bass. And that's important to me, so that's why I don't need any subwoofers or 8-inch or bigger woofers in diameter. Waste of time, waste of money, waste of effort. So that's that. I use this a lot to reference my mix in mono. I have the Töörö from Fred's Lab. Great little hybrid synth. This is a wavetable synth with analog filters. Really, really nice. Don't let this petite frame discourage you. I have a MIDI CC controller here, which I use to program synths occasionally. I have a Akai MIDI sequence arpeggiator here, the ME20A, very unique product. I should definitely make a video about this one day because you'll find it very interesting actually. And below that I have a pan scan, automatic pans going on in your sound. But the way I'm going to show you this later is how you can really use this to chop up vocals in an analog way, because this is purely analog. So that's basically what I have going on at my workstation. So I have my mixing stuff, my drum machine, which I use to flesh out ideas for drum patterns while I'm working on in productions, and my master keyboard and stuff I really use at a day-to-day basis. This stuff here is just sits there because I have no other place to put it. This I don't use every day, but this other stuff, things I use every day. I have the Fostex Model 80 8-track quarter-inch analog tape recorder. I'm using this now to record my new album, which I announced in a video just a couple of weeks ago. I'm recording an album that will be released on cassette later, and I'm recording as much as I can analog on tape on this one. I have a Korg M3R below here. We have the Yamaha TX802, which is a DX7 II. This is a stereo FM synth. I have the Roland MSQ-700 sequencer, and we have a Roland U220. And I have the Tascam 4-track Porta Studio below here, the 422, which you saw in previous videos as well. And it sits on top of a Roland JV880, which is my favorite JV Roland synth. So here I have the Mark of the Unicorn MIDI Express XT. This is a MIDI patch bay, so all the synths in this rack and from here are patched through this. So this MIDI in comes from the master keyboard. If you remember back, I had 2 MIDI outs of that MIDI splitter, MIDI merger, which is really what it was. And going into this, I can play these synths from that master keyboard. So next in the rack, we have the Kawai K3M, a wonderful hybrid synth from the mid-80s. Here we have the Korg EX-800, the module version of the DW8000, great synth. And the Roland D550, of course. And all of these synths from these 2 racks are coming into this Roland M160 line mixer. When I'm working on tracks and just browsing through preset sounds or factory sounds or sounds I made myself from these synths, I use this as a monitor mixer. So every synth is coming in here, and I run everything out and into the DAW for listening. So when I find sounds I like, I want to record, I don't record through this mixer. This is just a monitor mixer while I'm working. And here we have the Krumar Bit 01, great Italian synth, the module version of the bit synths. Great for Italo disco and genres like that. I use this, I won't say I use it a lot, but I use it occasionally when I just need that perfect sound for a track, and that will often come from this synth. So recommended. And here's the Patchbay, audio Patchbay, and this is set up now in a half normal mode, meaning the synths are going into this at the back, but also at the back they're going back to this line mixer, so I can monitor through these when I want to do that. But when I want to record the synths directly going out of the synths, I can take them out of these output points here. So half normaling means that it's connected at the back, but I can take them out here by patching in a patch cord going to the MIDI, the audio interface. So let's try this by using the Kawai K3M and the Krumar Bit 01, both being played by the master keyboard, using the Roland M160, turning up the faders and hard panning left and right on the channels for these 2 synths. Starting at the bottom, the mighty Yamaha TX816 rack, of course. 8 individual Yamaha DX7s in each of these TF1 cards. Wonderful system. Sounds glorious with each of these panned and tuned differently. Cost a fortune back in the day, not so much these days, but I use this a lot. You have the Yamaha Rev7 effects unit. I use this mainly as a chorus unit, the symphonic patch. Classic 80s sounds out of these effects reverberators, as they're called. Korg SDD-2000, sampling digital delay. It has both great delays and it has sampling, MIDI playable afterwards in mono, not polyphonic sampling, but mono samples. A cheap way of getting into the sample thing back in the mid-80s, but of course you can't control the samples or edit the samples in any way afterwards. You can just play it, but this is mostly used and meant as a delay unit, so you could change out sounds just like on the AMS delays from the early 80s. Another great sampler from the late 80s, the Casio FC10M, the rack version of the FC1. Great 16-bit sounding sampler with a great filter, lots of opportunities with this. It had a sort of large display for its time, and I really like this sampler, and I've used it a lot in the past. This is quite new in my studio, the rack mount version of the Korg DSS1 sampler. This is the DSM1. I will have a video for you later about this sampler. It's not exactly the same as the DSS1. This actually has a lot of changes done to it, some for the better and a lot for the worse, but it is an interesting sampler in many ways, and I'll show you this later. And trusty Akai S1000 did a ton of work on this back in the day, and the S1100 even more. I have a ton of custom-made samples for this machine. But this is in a state of repair right now. I have to swap out the power supply inside it before I can use it again. So this is just now sitting here waiting for me to do just that. And here we have the Yamaha DMP7. And I use this only with the TX816 rack. The TX816 has 8 outputs, and this mixer has 8 inputs. So I'm inputting the 8 DX7s from the 816, panning them as I want them, and setting the levels, etc. And setting effects. This has 3 different effects you can use, each similar to the Rev7 you saw before. So this has everything I need actually to submix the TX816, a digital mixer from Yamaha from 1987, the DMP7. On top here, not plugged in at the moment, the Korg EX-800, the module version of the Poly 800. Very nice early 80s synth. I really like this. And on top of here, something not related to this at all. This is a Zengo audio interface from Antelope Audio. I use this mainly as a recording device on my laptop. I just have it sitting here at the moment. Nothing really fancy about that. So let's move on. When I fire up the DMP7 with its internal effects and the TX816 rack firing on all cylinders, I think the combination is glorious. And I can play this from this Yamaha KX88 master keyboard, again from the 80s, 1984. And this combination is just an instant time machine. Let's play just a couple of bars. And this is, of course, the Roland Jupiter 8, one of the most, if not the most sought-after synth in the world. And it is great, no doubt about it. This is not mine, unfortunately, and I'll have to return it soon. I've had it for a long time now, but I'm sure the owner would want it back one of these days. So I have to make the best use of it as I can right now, and that is using it on my record, which I told you about earlier, my cassette album. So some of the sounds on that album will, of course, come from the Roland Jupiter 8. And now things starts to get interesting, because in this corner I have a lot of things going on, crammed into this tight little corner here. Down here I have a Roland Alpha Juno 2. And this is not the Alpha I've used in earlier videos. This is another one. Up here I have the Sequential Circuits 6-track, a great synth, and I'm using this a lot on my album, by the way. Up here I have the Oberheim Matrix 12, another great one, of course. This will also see some action on my album. And some candy stuff going back here. I have a big, for the time, a big 29-inch Sony Trinitron TV screen, which I used to watch old movies, VHS movies, and play video games. It's tucked away now, but yeah. Here is a Commodore 1701 monitor, which I use with my other Commodore 64, which you can't see, but I'll pan the camera down so you can see it. With some more candy as well, and a floppy drive and some accessories, a joystick, among other things. And as you can see behind here, I have a lot of synths stacked up in a vertical position. So to really look at those, to see what those are, I'll have to take these away for the moment so I can get access. So let's do it. Okay, so let's see what we've got. I have a Sequential Prophet 2000 sampler here. You saw the rack. I had the 2002 rack module of this. Here's a Yamaha DX7S, which I really like. I have my other Roland Alpha Juno 2. That's the one you've seen in a lot of my videos before. And behind that, I have the Roland S10, and I have a Yamaha SY22 vector synthesizer. I'll show you more of this in a later video where I will compare it to some synths that would be fair to use as a comparison. We have the Roland S50, of course, Roland's first sampler. Really dig this sampler. I have some accessories for it as well. And we have the Emax 2, that's been with me for quite a while. And behind that, under the dust cover, which I've now taken off, you can see the Korg DSS1. Well, this is basically where this video ends, but this is a short glimpse of what I have in one of my storage rooms, where I keep some of the stuff, or a lot of the stuff, I don't have room for in my main studio room. So if you want to have a look at this, head over to my Patreon page, where I'll show you what I have in this storage room, and some other cool stuff as well, which is not included in the main studio tour. As always, I'm Espen Kraft, and I am the 80s. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.